Welcome to the Blast Zone, the podcast where we dig up the bombs that shook Hollywood and try to find out why they went up in flames. This week, when there's something strange in the neighborhood, who you gonna call? Michael J. Fox. This is the Frighteners. Welcome to the Blast Zone.
Welcome to the Blast Zone.
We are not a podcast about bad movies. We are a podcast about movies that did badly.
That's right.
I'm Jon Drake, in-house film critic of my Letterboxd account.
And I'm Ian Dukes. I'm a person with thoughts and feelings, and some of them are about movies.
Movies like The Frighteners, which we'll be talking about today. Very exciting, very spooky. But before we get into all that, Ian, how are you doing this week?
I got one word for you. Hot. And I got a couple other words for you. It's hot in LA. There's a heat dome situation. It's not fun. It's our worst heat wave of the year. We're getting a little taste of the climate catastrophe that's scourging the rest of the world right now. I can't cry too much. It's not as bad as the heat in China or the flooding in Pakistan or the drought in Europe, but it's not fun. It's scary. And it's like a little taste of what summers are going to be like. Checking the news and, everything is terrible.
I fucking hate the summer. I'm such a grump in my old age. I can't stand the heat. I don't like the bugs. I don't get summer break. I'm a grown-ass man, I think that's the only thing that really endears summer to us as children. You don't have to go to school, and then we hold on to that for a few years after because we haven't yet realized summer actually sucks. I'm out of school for long enough now to acknowledge that summer's the worst. I'm so ready for fall to get here.
I'm ready for fall too. We don't have fall here.
Southern California?
I'm waiting for slightly not summer to get here.
Do you even own a jacket?
I own a lot of jackets, and I rarely take them out of my closet. I feel terrible for them.
I love a good jacket. I don't know if I could live on the West Coast, especially with a furry little hood or something. I don't know.
You'd have to do San Francisco where it's always chilly, even in summer.
Now that we've talked about the climate quite a bit, do you want to talk about the climate of television and film and maybe something you've watched?
That's a great segue because I watched a summery show. It's called The Resort, recommended to me by a mutual friend of ours, Jill, who pretty much insisted I watch it. I obliged, and she was right. It's a good show. It's on Peacock. It's a brand new show, just finished dropping the first season. It stars Kristen Milioti and William Jackson Harper, who you might know from The Good Place. We know Kristen Milioti from Palm Springs. And guess what? The guy, Andy Ciara, who wrote Palm Springs, created this show.
Oh.
A writer that I'm like, I got to see what else this guy can do. And so far, he's doing really cool stuff. It's a bit of a thrilling mystery, and it's also a funny comedy. But most of all, I was impressed in the pilot with how true and real the relationship drama felt. It's really real, and it's really well acted and really well written. I'm going out on a limb here because I've only seen one episode, but as you know, even finishing one full episode is kind of a big deal for me. So I can't wait to see where this goes. I'm digging The Resort.
Nice. Yeah, I loved Palm Springs. I did not realize the writer of Palm Springs was involved in this, but that makes me want to check it out a little more. Yeah, have you seen White Lotus?
That's one that I gave 10 minutes and I walked away. Not because it was bad, but I didn't catch the mood.
It's a funny thing, though, the Armageddon Deep Impact effect, where these two very similar shows are coming out relatively close to each other. They might not be similar in tone. I haven't seen either of them. Just the basic premise kind of seems eerily similar. So I was going to ask you which one is the Armageddon, which one's the Deep Impact. But then I realized that I don't even know what I mean by that because I couldn't tell you which of those two movies I prefer at this point in my life.
Oh, okay.
I guess Armageddon would be the dumber one and Deep Impact would be the slightly more nuanced, elegant one. But I haven't seen either of those movies in 15 years. So what the fuck am I even talking about?
You don't know. Pick your poison.
Yeah. To tie into today's movie, one of the main reasons we're covering The Frighteners, in addition to a nice email we got from a listener, Kimberly, that asked us to cover it, and I thought timing was perfect. Frighteners is Peter Jackson movie. What's Peter Jackson best known for? Meet the Feebles, of course. No, best known for directing the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and kind of a big show just dropped last night, The Rings of Power, debuted on Amazon.
How is it?
Dropped 2 episodes. I've only got to see 1 so far.
Okay.
I think it is already better than the entire Hobbit trilogy. That is not the great praise you may think. It's a pretty low bar, but I really am enjoying it. I'm a sucker for Lord of the Rings stuff. It's been said that I'm a ring cell. People have also remarked that I'm Lord Pilled. I've heard said from time to time.
I've never heard any of these things, but I like them.
Yeah, I really don't need a lot to dive into a Lord of the Rings property. I even gave the Hobbit movies a fair shake and saw the first one. I was like, it wasn't quite what I wanted, but it was still fun. And then by the end of the second one, I was like, yeah, fuck these. But no, they seem to have put a lot of work into crafting an atmosphere that invokes the Jackson movies for sure. They owe a lot to the visual design of those movies.
Sure.
But I like that they seem to be shooting on a decent amount of sets. I was very nervous. I think a lot of the magic of the Jackson Lord of the Rings trilogy is that everything feels lived in and real and doesn't feel like sound stages most of the time. And I didn't want them to lose that. And it seems like they at least took that step. They invested a lot of money into this thing and they built some really cool sets.
Cool.
Did some really solid costume design. I don't know if they worked with Weta Workshop for the effects. I would imagine it would be blasphemy not to, but I didn't have time to look into that. But the story's still taking shape. Just finished one episode of the two they dropped. It's pretty standard fantasy stuff. You haven't really gotten to see what role everyone's going to play and what they're really all aiming for and how they overlap yet. It could take a steep dive off a cliff and become terrible, but personally, I think it's going to at least be good, if not great.
That's very encouraging. I tried to check out that first episode and my Amazon streaming crashed on me several times. And it might have just been the hand of the Dark Lord Sauron working against me, but I took it to mean that the show was incredibly popular and the fans were overwhelming Amazon servers.
Right. I was frustrated on your behalf because I was able to load up Amazon Prime without an issue and dive in and you were struggling. And I said, well, I guess that's kind of good news for Amazon because you hear about HBO has a long history of crashing when there's a finale or a premiere for a big show for them. But you figure if anyone knows servers, it would be Amazon.
That's true.
So they haven't released any numbers as far as I know yet. Review wise, I'd say it's good to great. Some places I trust were raving about it. Some were a little more lukewarm. It's probably going to be considered at least a mild success, but they already renewed it for season 2. So what are the stakes here? But let's talk about the Frighteners. Ian, what did you know about this movie before we sat down today? Do you remember anything about it? Did you see it? Did you move to New Zealand to do some cinematography on it or something?
I was not so lucky with this one. I knew the poster image and that's almost all. Like when you hear about the details, it feels like a movie that everybody should have seen. You go, oh, remember that Michael J. Fox comedy Ghostbusters type of movie from the late 90s? And you're like, yeah, that must have been a big thing. And I guess it wasn't. I never saw it. I just somehow knew it existed and didn't get a chance.
I'm very much in the same boat, which is rare. Usually one of us has a little more knowledge of the movie beforehand, but I also vividly remember this poster, passing it in the video store, seeing it in a movie theater before it came out, maybe when I was going to see Independence Day. It's a great poster in the sense that it's a very striking and memorable image. I'd say it fails as a poster in getting you to understand what movie it is you're going to sit down and watch and tell you anything about it, which was Peter Jackson's complaint about the poster. He did have issues with it because it looks real scary. It's a real scary picture. It's creepy. Cool, yeah. It's a really cool image, but it makes you think you're going to sit down and watch a much more serious, frightening horror movie, which is not the movie we got at all. And there's really no mention of Michael J. Fox on it. There's nothing to indicate to you that this might be at least partially a comedy.
Yeah, that's a weird move. If we can allow ourselves to jump deep into the production and release discussion, like you said, Peter Jackson was like, they fucked me with the poster. That poster didn't sell the movie. But I actually think that if Peter Jackson had gotten the October release date that he was aiming for, then this would have been a good poster because as a spooky movie, which I think this movie can work as, that poster would be great because scary movies that just have one iconic scary image, that's a good way to hook people into a scary movie. If you're trying to sell it as an action summer blockbuster comedy, which is what the studio decided they were trying to do, then you got to pull up Michael J. Fox and sell the romance and sell the comedy and all those parts, which the poster fails to do entirely. So there was some cross wires there.
That's a great point, actually. I think you're dead on. That poster does work for an October release, but they moved the release date on Peter Jackson against his and Robert Zemeckis' wishes. And they didn't, as far as I could tell, alter any of the marketing for it, which is a big miss. There's weirdly quite a bit of post-mortem deep diving into why this movie failed, mostly by Peter Jackson himself. He's typically a very honest evaluator of his own work in retrospect. And he seems really proud of this movie, but sad it didn't connect with more audiences. And he was more than willing to offer up a long list of reasons why. But the poster being a big one, just because you said that's what you remember from it. And I think a lot of people would agree with you. I know a lot of people remember this poster, but I would venture a guess that very few of them actually saw the movie, which, spoiler alert, we both think is pretty good.
It's pretty fun. It's got a ton of cool stuff. It's really smart. I almost think it's too smart, or not that the movie is too smart, but that Peter Jackson and his partner and co-writer, Fran Walsh, are a little too clever for their own good. Because they put so much stuff in here. Like they worked so hard to make it all work. And on paper, you can take it apart and everything connects to everything else. But it's so busy. It's so stuffed, full of stuff. And part of that is enjoyable. The first half of this movie, you're along along for the ride and you're like, whoa, this movie is a roller coaster ride. But there's a certain point where you start to get roller coaster fatigue and you're like, ooh, I might need to get off this ride. I'm starting to feel queasy. That might be one of my complaints about it.
Yeah, you said something really smart that I'm going to repeat now, and hopefully listeners will attribute it back to me because they forgot the part where I said that you said it first. You said it over text message. There's no audio record of it, so it's my quote now.
I can't prove this. Damn it.
No, but you said that as the movie gets to the climax, it should be narrowing its scope to kind of focus in on the main problems and the main antagonists, but actually it ends up broadening its scope as it gets towards the climax, which is not something that Peter Jackson is immune to. He's got a little bit of a track record of filling the ends of his movies a little too much, maybe.
He certainly got to indulge that because J.R.R. Tolkien was right there with him. And he said, look, this is the way the man said it goes.
It's really a match made in heaven in that sense.
But this is before then. And he's got a lot of meat to chew on in that final third of the movie.
He wasn't really a new filmmaker, but he was new to mainstream cinema in a big way. And he was given final cut and complete artistic control. And he wrote the movie. So he's got all these cool scenes he probably wrote and he really wants to fit them in somewhere. I can see the thought process behind why this movie is so overstuffed. The version of this movie I watched was over 2 hours long for a breezy horror comedy. You know, like it's really not what you expect.
For a 90s comedy action, yeah, that's kind of a sin in itself, that's the director's cut. I think there's 12 or 14 minutes.
12 minutes, yeah, 12 extra. Yeah. But still, an hour and 50 is no breezy.
That's pushing it. And it feels longer. It's exhausting, man. On my second watch, I thought I kind of knew that there were certain scenes and set pieces of action. And then I watched it again. I'm like, no, wait, these big set pieces, they're connected. There's not even a rest in between. You're like, bam, from one fight scene to another one in a different location. It's really hot and heavy.
I was shocked that in watching it, I feel like Michael J. Fox actually has not a ton of dialogue in this movie. I noticed on my rewatch, he's always kind of played motormouth characters. He's a little more subdued here. Part of that, I think, is he's trying to tamp down his natural kind of goofiness and charisma to play more of, what would you call him? He's kind of a dirtbag, right?
He is. It's hard to figure out what he's doing because I think all of us, certainly me, you bring expectations of, oh, that's the Michael J. Fox character. He's Marty McFly. He's a wisecracker. He's going to be cynical and maybe a little smarmy and edgy at times, but he's going to be likable and funny and have a hopeful spirit. But then you're like, wait a minute, no, this character lacks any hopeful spirit at all. He's really not funny. He's really pretty sour, deeply cynical and misanthropic. We'll have to get into it, but it's very interesting to try to consume what Michael J. Fox is trying to give you in this character.
Yeah, well, let me get into the making of the movie and then we can go over the specific story beats and where we think the Frank Bannister character works and maybe where he doesn't. Do you want to hear a little bit about the making of it? It wasn't exactly the smoothest production.
Yeah, let's hear how this thing happened.
Okay. Peter Jackson was a well-regarded director of small-budget, schlocky gore fests after starting his career with the horror comedies Bad Taste, Meet the Feebles, and Brain Dead, or Dead Alive, depending on where you live.
Or where you're dead.
His career trajectory changed forever in 1994 when he wrote, with his partner Fran Walsh, and directed the critically acclaimed crime drama Heavenly Creatures, which got him an Oscar nomination for Best Original Screenplay, and launched the film careers of both Kate Winslet and Melanie Linsky. After making a controversial mockumentary called Forgotten Silver, Jackson and Walsh revisited an idea they had come up with during the writing of Heavenly Creatures for a supernatural horror comedy called The Frighteners. After writing a treatment and presenting it to Robert Zemeckis liked the idea and asked the duo to write a full script so it could be released as a spin-off film for the television series Tales from the Crypt.
He was like,
"Send the full screenplay to me, the script keeper."
After reading the full script, though, Zemeckis thought the tone of the movie would work better both as a standalone film and with Jackson's sensibilities and championed him getting the chance to direct the movie, brokering a deal with frequent collaborator Universal Pictures to finance and distribute the film, while also ensuring Jackson artistic control and final cut privileges. Given a $20 million budget for what would be an extremely effects-heavy film, Jackson bolstered the roster and equipment of his in-house effects studio, Weta Workshop, so they'd be prepared for a project of this size. Given permission to film in his home country of New Zealand, despite the movie taking place in the American Midwest, Jackson went about casting the movie, securing Michael J. Fox as the lead character Frank Bannister, a disgraced paranormal investigator with a checkered past.
He's a man with dead family ties.
Trini Alvarado was cast as the romantic lead, and a roster of reliable character actors filled out the rest of the roles, with even John Astin joining as the ghost of an Old West gunslinger. With an extremely long shooting schedule that lasted from May to November of 1995, the shoot was not without its troubles. Cinematographer cinematographer Alan Bollinger had a serious car accident and was out of commission for some time. He was replaced by John Blick while recovering and later alternated duties when Bollinger was well enough to continue working. Many of the actors also complained of being homesick during the 7-month shoot in New Zealand, and Weta Workshop was overwhelmed by the requirements of the movie as the film featured more digital effects shots than almost any that had come before it, and Industrial Light and Magic animation supervisor Wes Takahashi was brought on to oversee the film and confirm it was completed in time. The movie was given an additional $6 million to hire 15 more animators and purchase workstations for them, and the movie's release date was actually moved up at this point from October to July, as the studio was so happy with the rough cut they'd seen they wanted it in their summer blockbuster slot.
Okay, that could sound sexual, but they're actually just box office positive.
With its new release date of July 19th, 1996 set, The Frighteners would run into a buzzsaw with Independence Day dominating the summer blockbuster landscape. Critics mostly liked the movie as it sits at 67% on Rotten Tomatoes, but audiences were being pulled elsewhere as it debuted in 5th place with only $5.5 million. It would drop to 11th place its second week with only $2.7 million and would eventually leave theaters as a bomb, earning only $29 million against its $26 million budget. It would gain a loyal following as a cult classic, though, and I'm pretty sure Jackson's career has been fine.
He managed to pull out of the dive, but like you're saying in here, this movie was ambitious in so many ways. It's quite impressive. It's actually like a really fun story about Peter Jackson's career trajectory in Hollywood, because we were talking about the script and how ambitious he was and how many plot lines are woven together, and he makes all these little things happen and what we think is probably an excessive degree of difficulty in the script. But then you're telling us he also was over the top ambitious on the special effects, more shots than had ever been attempted in a movie before for a guy who was just getting to do his first big Hollywood kind of movie. Really wild.
He's definitely a man who dreams big. Think about how many ghosts are in this movie, and they're not easy computer animated ghosts. They're real people playing them, and you have to have this ghost effect covering them at all times. So he had to film every scene twice, essentially. Once with the human actors hitting their marks and in their spots, and another time with whatever the ghost actor was doing against a green screen, sync it up correctly, and then overlay them somehow. It was not an easy thing. And like we said, one of the most effects heavy movies ever made at this point in time, which is bizarre. Like, I've often remarked upon how truly extraordinary it is that Peter Jackson was even given the chance to make Lord of the Rings, which was several $100 million investment from New Line Cinemas and years of work. Because, like, what did he have to show for it? His one effects heavy film before that was a bomb. I mean, his gory, schlocky horror movies were very practical effect heavy, and he brought a lot of that sensibility to the Lord of the Rings trilogy, like we talked about, and tried to make as much of it practical as he could. But there's still a ton of CGI in those movies. Like, why did people think he was capable of it? He certainly was, we came to find out, but it's so strange and fortuitous that he was given the chance.
Interesting that you said that. I was trying to find old reviews, and movies this old, it's hard to get the full ones online, but I started Rotten Tomatoes and at least read the blurb version. And somebody big said that this movie feels like a demo reel for a director who wants to do effects. That was Ebert? Okay, I thought it might be. And it turns out it kind of it was. That was prescient. He literally predicted that this would get Peter Jackson hired in the future, and look what it did.
I think something that people have forgotten about Peter Jackson, it certainly comes through a little bit in The Lord of the Rings and maybe too much in the Hobbit movies, but like, he's a fucking goofball. He's a silly man. He likes to make jokes. He likes to have funny movies. You watched at least a little bit of Meet the Feebles, which I still call a horror movie because so much of what happens in that is fucking horrifying.
It's brutal. I know. I think I watched it end to end and I was traumatized.
Oh, you did? Wow. Brave soul. It's been many years since I've done that. Like, even his most gory horror movies were just loaded with jokes end to end, and this is no exception, but he really balances the tone of this movie very well and knows when to pull back on the humor and when to hit the gas.
You talk about his sense of humor. That's one thing that I actually wished the sense of humor stuck with you. I think a lot of people have observed that this film is a horror comedy in the first half, and then by the end, the comedy gets kind of killed off, and it's pretty horrific.
Literally?
The climax of this movie.
There is one character we're going to have to talk about at length that I think was intended to be comedic, but I found him mostly repellent, so it didn't have the intended effect. I think you know who I'm talking about.
I'll probably agree on that.
But the movie makes it pretty easy to tell when a scene is funny versus when it's somber, just because there's appearance of certain characters that it's shorthand for, okay, you guys can stop worrying. Nothing scary is going to happen now. We've got our funny guys on screen until it doesn't. Until they're done away with in a frightening turn. Those are our buddies Stuart and Cyrus, played by the great Shy McBride, and Jim Fife, who I'm not familiar with.
I had to look him up. He has an interesting career trajectory. It's not all about Hollywood.
No, yeah. He's an interesting guy. Shy McBride, of course, still kicking it. One of our finest working actors. I was a big fan of that. Did you remember that show, Boston Public? He played the principal on that show, and I really loved that show for some reason. I have no idea why.
Wait, was that a Shatner show, or am I thinking of a different Boston?
No, you're thinking of Boston Legal. I think it was the same
okay.
creator. I think that was David E. Kelly created both shows, I think. But no, Boston Public was about a Boston public high school. Bit of a melodrama, bit of a comedy. I think I watched it because Nicky Katt was on it, and I was a big Nicky Katt fan.
Cool.
Still am. But Chad McBride played the principal on there, and I was like, this guy rules. So I've always sought out his roles and enjoyed them.
He's fun. He's a kick in the pants to this movie. Those ghost characters are played in a very broad kind of comedy, which sometimes had some rough edges, which we'll point out. But they do add a lot of life to the movie, especially because Michael J. Fox is such a fucking bummer. So you're like, thank God there's somebody light on screen.
He's really like downtrodden in this movie. I mean, understandably so, I guess, when you get his backstory, which why don't we just dive into? You want to give us a little bit of his backstory?
All right, let's jump into this story. Ever since the day his wife died, Frank Bannister, played by Michael J. Fox, has been a sad, lonely shell of a man. And also, he's been able to see ghosts. So he went into business with a trio of wacky spirits, scamming residents of his town with staged hauntings and coming to their rescue as a phony psychic ghostbuster. One day, Frank pulls his scam on a local health fanatic named Ray and his wife, a doctor named Lucy. In a seemingly unrelated story, earlier that day, Lucy had tended to a woman named Patricia Bradley, the former girlfriend of notorious mass killer Johnny Bartlett, now confined to her mother's care in their spooky old house. But more on that later. Now, while performing his phony exorcism, Frank notices a glowing number 37 carved into Ray's forehead. And the next day, Ray turns up dead, killed by the same crushing heart attack that's recently claimed the lives of a growing number of Fairfield residents.
This movie starts off with a bang. We get a very showy, special effects heavy sequence in a haunted mansion. I felt Zemeckis' hand here a little bit. It reminded me of nothing more than the intro to Who Framed Roger Rabbit, with the way the camera is moving around the room so freely, almost like an over-the-shoulder view of the characters at times. If you remember that animated intro to Who Framed Roger Rabbit in the kitchen, kind of gave me that vibe, but in a haunted mansion setting instead. And I was expecting to be underwhelmed by the effects in a 1996 $20 million movie, but no, they're pretty good, especially in this sequence, but also throughout the movie. They're really solid.
Yeah, the spooky mansion is just a killer haunted house. As classic and cool and spooky as you would ever want to see in a movie. There's like a thrill ride right in through the window and through holes in the floor, and there's screams and scary images, and then there's ghosts that start to push through the wallpaper, which sort of evokes what you're seeing in the poster that we talked about. And all of that is kind of on a little island. It makes for a really great opening scene that brings you in. You're like, this is a fucking kick-ass spooky movie. Nothing gross or weird, just straight ahead cool ghost stuff. And then it introduces more, and this is where the movie is already off on a weird foot, where that whole thing is almost a red herring, or it's a mystery that misdirects you for most of the movie until it tells you what's really going on. But it's so much fun.
Yeah, it stays unrelated to the Frank portion of the movie for a long time.
Yeah.
And you almost kind of forget that you're watching a movie where everything's supposed to tie together at some point, and you just start kind of enjoying them as parallel stories. I think late in the second act or early in the third act, when it actually does tie the two together, you're like, oh shit, I forgot that these were supposed to be related to each other. That's cool. I felt like I was watching two separate movies for a while, but now they're one movie. And that's another kind of Jackson-y thing, you know? Think about his movies. He tends to split up his main characters. They go on their own adventures, and then everyone meets back up at the end. This stuff is great. I think the acting in this little side story is universally pretty stellar. Juliana McCarthy playing the creepy old mom, old lady Bradley. She doesn't actually get a first name. Of course, Dee Wallace, the mom from E.T.
Yeah.
As Patricia Bradley.
She's really good.
Yeah, she's really good. Peter Jackson casted her because he thought like everyone would trust the mom from E.T.
Oh, nice move.
Yeah, he was crafty. Jake Busey, I was like shocked to see him in this movie. I thought Jake Busey was like in his mid-30s now. And I was like, how is he in this movie from almost 20 years ago? But no, he's an older man than I thought. Okay. You want to take a guess?
Oh, no, I'm with you. I'm totally confused about how old he could be.
He's 51.
Oh, okay.
I was shocked. He still looks pretty good. I saw him in a TV show not too long ago, and I was like, oh, that's Jake Busey. Still very recognizable as himself. Do you know where I saw him?
No.
Justified. That's right. It's our Justified crossover of the week.
Justified crossover of the week.
Oh, damn.
Jake Busey, playing Johnny Bartlett in this movie, was also a safecracker on the final season of Justified named Louis Mago or Mago. I can't remember. Jake Busey, he's got a very, I don't want to say typecast. Maybe it's more his method of acting. I think he just either does a bunch of cocaine before he films a scene, or he's done enough in his life to kind of know how to mimic it. But he's got a real coked up energy to him in every performance I've ever seen.
And he's good in this role. This was an interesting casting because because we were talking about him being out of time in real life, but he's out of time in this movie. He's a character from many years before that we meet in flashbacks to, what is that? That time period can't be as old as it looks. Now I'm really confused about the timeline of this movie. I'm like, oh, he's from the 30s, but no, his girlfriend is not a...
No, he does dress like he's from the 30s, but he couldn't have been. Hold on. We got to get to the bottom of this.
No, because Dee Wallace is maybe in her 40s and she was his girlfriend.
But she was a teenager.
So maybe it was supposed to be like a 1960s, 1990s kind of thing.
I could see like late 50s, early 60s. Yeah, they kind of that styling going on. The movie is pretty vague about time periods. It's meant to feel like a little bit timeless. Charles Starkweather was who this character was based on. He was a real murderer. Right. His crimes ended in 1959. Okay. So I could see them trying to play that parallel up, and that lines up with what we know about their ages.
That totally works. I was somehow thinking Starkweather was like a 30s kind of guy, but no, that makes total sense.
He was born in the 30s, but yeah, he died in 59 after his reign of terror was brought to an end. But Busey's, he's pretty good in this. He's a creep in this movie, and that seems to kind of be where he is most comfortable playing. I think his acting gets bad in the third act in one particular sequence, but that's a long ways away. We got a lot of stuff to cover before then. Let's talk about Michael J. Fox, the Marty McFly of it all. Like we said, he's really trying to play against type here. He's not quite a Venkman. We lamented in Evolution that they tried to give us two Venkmans, which does not work at all. This movie doesn't give us any Venkmans. He's a con man like Venkman is, but he doesn't have that rabble-rouser spirit, I guess.
He's not a particularly endearing one. Like, he is pretty much done with the world. He lost his wife. He lives in a very sad condition where they never finished building his house after the day of the accident. He spends his time scamming his neighbors out of cash with this ghost scam. But it's not just that. With that, he could still wink at you and go, hey, I'm getting paid, I'm getting mine. But he does weird things. Like when we first see him interacting, he crashes his car through this guy's front yard and smashes his white picket fence, tears up the lawn, and the guy comes out and yells at him for that. And then he gets revenge on the guy for very legitimately yelling at him. When he backs up, he purposely crushes the guy's gnomes.
Not only that, and then haunts his house. Like he marks him to be a potential,
then he
customer.
Picks him for his next victim customer. But he's like, yes, I crashed through your front yard, threatening your very life, not to mention your property. And he's like, oh, you're going to yell at me for that? Fuck you. I'm destroying more shit on the way out. And you're like, this guy's kind of harsh. And Michael J. Fox plays it fairly real, not cracking wise, like being pretty somber. And it did make you think there's very few people, Bill Murray being one of them, who can play a guy who's a true misanthrope and like really wants to fuck with the world, but is still lovable. And Michael J. Fox can be very lovable, but not in this character. You're like, ooh, this guy is rough.
Michael J. Fox always struck me as like way more sincere than Bill Murray. So, and that works against him in some of these scenes because you feel he's doing what he's doing sincerely and not like sarcastically. But what he's doing is pretty bad. Like you said, he fucked this guy's house up, fucked his lawn up because he just was distracted. Like he's the worst driver in the world is the theory we've had to come up with. Either that or he's drunk all the time. But the movie doesn't really give us that indication that he's a real heavy drinker.
No, you can be forgiven thinking that at the beginning when you haven't seen much of him and he hasn't said much. And you're like, this guy's depressed and he's living this terrible life. Maybe he's drunk all the time. But then there's later scenes where he's stone cold sober, you can tell in the scene, and he still gets in the car and just drives over curbs and crashes through rails constantly. And like, it's comical. It's over the top. It's some serious stunt driving to show the way this man drives. Peter Jackson has a stuntman pull some really crazy shit coming down this mountain pass and cutting every switchback, driving like an absolute maniac.
He is just
it's insane.
Super reckless. Chaos. Like the first time I watched it, I'll be honest with you, I smoked a little pot, some cigweed, and I had a note like, is this even saving him any time? But I didn't put like what I was talking about. I was like, what the fuck was I talking about? So then I rewatched. I was like, oh, there it is. Okay. Now I know what I meant by that. Yeah, his driving is out of control throughout the movie.
And it's kind of a joke, but then it's not because like we said, he crashes into this guy's yard and he's like, fuck you for letting me crash into your yard. And then you realize there's a deeper and even creepier subtext when you find out that his wife died in a car crash when he was behind the wheel. And you're like, oh shit, this guy is such a reckless driver. It cost him his wife. It ruined his life. And he's not repentant about it. He hasn't changed his ways and he still thinks it's the world's problem and not his problem. It's a pretty dark place to start if you start to think about this deeply.
Yeah, it is. It's probably one of the biggest problems with his character just because it makes him a little less lovable. And I know the movie was trying to make him a little less lovable than we're used to from Michael J. Fox, but the driving thing, like you said, it ties back to the main storyline in such a tragic way that it stops being funny once you watch the movie a second time.
Yeah.
It colors everything in this really like dark undertone. I don't know what to say about it. It's just weird.
I don't know if you have time to make that full impression that we've got it now about studying this movie because the movie comes at you so hard and fast. I'm not really sure if that's what theater goers thought about in the first week and told their friends the second second week, and that led to the box office woes. But it is weird when you pick it apart.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about Ray for a second, played by Peter Dodson. His characterization was a little all over the place in these early scenes. The movie kind of figures out who he is a little later on, but it didn't strike me as a guy who'd be so attached to a lawn gnome early on.
No, it's a strange mix of traits that they bundled into him. I noticed that right away, too, because you're like, oh, he's a meathead, he's a jock, he's a workout fanatic, and he was really into garden gnomes and then like other statuettes and tchotchkes throughout his home.
Yeah, it feels like a character that was maybe overwritten now that you mention it. Like, you didn't have to go so far. He's like very hateable, but in an interesting way. He doesn't come off as a bad person necessarily. He's married to Lucy, who ends up being the co-lead of the movie. We've met her briefly at this point, but you're rooting for her to get away from him, but not because he's like abusive or he doesn't love her or he's dismissive. Really, he's just kind of fucking annoying. That's like his main sin.
Yeah, it does annoying things. She's having a conversation with him and he puts up his finger to shush her, and just other things that you're like, oh, this guy's a dick and he doesn't really understand his wife.
But the movie's also reluctant to make him into a full villain. So I think the movie also understands, like, we didn't write a super evil ex-boyfriend character, or ex-husband rather, character into the movie. So there is a delicate balance they have to play between him and Lucy, where you can see that their marriage is probably not good for Lucy, at least, and probably not for either of them. But also, it can't be the world's worst situation.
No, and he kind of gets some redemption by the end, where he ends up hanging around when he shouldn't and trying to win her back, thinking he's going to come back to life. But then he ends up being a little bit of a hero and gets her out of trouble because he's so dedicated to her. So he gets a little bit of redemption.
And let's talk about Lucy a little bit, because I really liked her.
Yeah, thank God.
She's fun. I don't know why I don't know this actor more, Trini Alvarado. She's been in stuff, but certainly not anything super high profile as of late. No real leading role. She tends to be like the seventh billed person in a lot of things. But I thought she gives a good performance here. She's very likable. She's got like a good like mid-90s leading lady look. She's very Andie MacDowell. I thought that immediately came to mind. I don't know if you also made that comparison.
Totally. She's cute and she's charming and she's plucky and smart. She's a great 90s leading lady. And thank God she's so lovable, because as we said, no one else is to this point. Her husband sucks. Michael J. Fox sucks. And you're like, okay, thank you. I like this lady. Show me what she's doing.
I would say by the end, there's a few more endearing characters, but yeah, we haven't really gotten to know them yet. I'll stand for Walt the Sheriff. I think Walt the Sheriff's a good dude. You don't really know what his deal is early on because he's so exasperated with Frank. Are they buddies? But no, he just seems like a nice guy.
He's a good dude, but
good at his job.
Yeah, that again shows you like how much you're dying to meet good people. That like this guy who just shows up a couple of times and is just decent and nice. Right. You're like, oh, I love that guy too.
A reasonable man. That's my favorite character. He's in 7 minutes of this movie and he doesn't do anything horrible. And then, of course, like we mentioned, Frank targets this family for another haunting. What'd you think of the reveal that the hauntings are hoaxes perpetrated by Frank and his two ghost friends?
I'm trying to think. I kind of lost what my initial impression was, because the movie does a good job of setting you up to think that he's a total fraud. You don't know that he sees ghosts by this point. You think he could just be faking this shit with conventional means. And then there's a big reveal that like he leaves and then his ghost friends hop out of his trunk. And you're like, oh shit, he really does see ghosts. He's just using them for his own gain.
And I don't know what the ghosts are getting out of this is the one question I guess just companionship.
I think you're right. That's all it is. And they have a testy relationship. They're not all that happy with being roped into this business. They don't really offer like, we hate this, but he gives us the ghost Scooby snacks or whatever we need to live. There's no like little hook like that I could spot.
Right. Yeah, the movie drives home the point. Like they don't eat, they don't drink, they can't interact with most people. There's really not much for them to do except just kind of hang out.
Yeah.
I assume they're just helping Frank out of boredom, which kind of makes sense, but it's a bit like nihilistic.
And like Stewart is easily pushed around. That's a point that they make, that maybe he's there just because of the force of will of Frank. But Shy McBride is quite outspoken, as is the judge, but they're still somehow, they're in it with him, man. They're threatening to leave at all times, but they're still there.
Right. The judge actually plays a little bit of a dual role here because he is both Frank's helper and also the creepy guy at the gas station you meet at the beginning of the horror movie who's like, you don't want to mess around with this. There's crazy stuff going on. There's scary people. He's trying to warn Frank that there's something more severe going on than the regular run-of-the-mill hauntings he's used to. But of course, he's not heeded until it's too late.
Which is an interesting point because that little scene is actually only in the director's cut. That wasn't in the theatrical.
Oh, okay. Just for the listeners' clarification, Ian watched the theatrical cut and I watched the director, so we're going to have some conflicting notes at times.
I went back on my second watch. I did do the director's cut, so I got to see him say that stuff. But that wasn't in the theatrical. There's actually several beats of setting up the bad guy who we're calling the Reaper sometimes, and the judge calls him the Soul Collector, I think. And that's the ominous, oh, there's something bigger than just ghosts out there. There's a Reaper kind of a guy stalking the town, and you better be scared. And then there's two other things in the director's cut. There's there's the scene where the ghosts, his two friends, Stuart and Cyrus, put a sheet over themselves and scare him, themselves looking like a Reaper, which I don't know why they came up with the idea. They're like, oh, we're just trying out new scare ideas. And then when Peter Jackson makes his cameo, he's got a t-shirt on with a Grim Reaper on it. And Frank stares at that for a minute and gets spooked. And all that was like not there in the theatrical.
Oh, interesting. Like, I think most of those scenes were pretty valuable to the overarching story.
That was my impression. My takeaway after seeing both is that they were all helpful. All the things that Peter Jackson put back into the director's cut are like not extravagances, really. They're like, oh, this kind of just helps you get what he's aiming at a little bit better. And they were cut for time.
For a long movie, it's light on fluff. There's really not much here that you could cut and not lose something. There's one thing I think you could cut very easily and make the movie shorter and better. That hasn't come up yet.
Yeah, I feel like there's a couple things we could talk about cutting in the second act. So maybe we'll jump into that.
All right, let's get into it. Lucy believes in Frank's ability to speak to the dead, so they go out to dinner where Frank helps her communicate with the ghost of her husband, Ray. But at the restaurant, Frank sees a man with a number 38 on his forehead get killed by a spirit that looks like a Grim Reaper. After the sheriff brings Frank in for questioning, Frank tries to track down the Reaper to stop the killings and clear his name, but only succeeds at being witness at the scene of murders 39 and 40. Frank turns himself into the cops and tries to explain, but FBI agent Milton Dammers, an expert in the paranormal, is sure Frank is the murderer. After another visit to the Bradley house, Lucy thinks Patricia's mom might be the killer, but when she goes to the police station to tell Frank, the Reaper marks her as his next victim and attacks. Frank and Lucy escape from the jail and attempt a daring plan. Lucy puts Frank in a near-death state so he can leave his body and confront the Reaper as a spirit. While an off-the-rails Agent Dammers kidnaps Lucy, Frank realizes the Reaper is actually the ghost of Johnny Bartlett, still murdering in an effort to increase his body count ever higher. Lucy escapes Dammers and revives Frank just in time to save his life, but just before his spirit can do away with the ghost of Johnny Bartlett for good.
Did you feel like the movie was ending when that whole...
It feels like it ended, yeah.
There was a lot of movie, and we condensed a lot in this synopsis with just, oh, there's murders 39 and 40, and oh, there's a trip to the Bradley house. But those are big sequences in the movie. There's just so much going on that it's kind of too much. And then you get to this big showdown. The main character says, I need to die in order to confront the big bad guy. And he does, and he confronts the big bad guy. And that was the second act. And we haven't even set up for the finale yet.
Let's not say that he dies. Let's call it what really happens. We'll have to refer to our friend Bill Hader for this one, but he gets flatlined.
That's right.
He basically does what they do in the movie Flatliners.
Flatline is when you technically lower your heart rate until, well, you're dead.
He's still dropping.
Then you can catch a glimpse of the afterlife. Got the idea from the film Flatliners, Joel Schumacher film shot by Jan de Bont.
And not as a hobby, unlike Bill Hader's character. He does this to bring down the big bad guy, and it almost works.
Cool idea, though. Yeah, that's a really fun, like, I was getting some shades of Nightmare on Elm Street from this section. The kids in those movies are always, like, struggling to stay awake longer until they finally realize the only way to defeat him is to, like, do it on his turf. And then they take sleeping pills or whatever so they can get into a deep enough sleep to fight Freddy Krueger. It almost follows those beats of the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie pretty closely at this point. Instead of Nancy, it's Frank. But that's a cool idea. Now you're in kind of uncharted territory for the main character. It makes you feel exhilarated because they're taking drastic steps to solve this problem, but also you feel the same kind of apprehension about it they do because it's uncharted territory.
And he goes to a super low point before they take this drastic step. They escape the jail. We're jumping out. This is kind of the second half of this act that we'll have to go back. But they escape the jail and he's like, fuck it, nothing else works. He's got a revolver and he's ready to blow his brains out in front of Lucy. He's like, I guess this is the only way I'm going to solve this movie.
Very nonchalant about it.
Let me just put this gun to my head. He doesn't even tell her to stand back. She's right next to him. And she's, no, wait.
She definitely would have gotten blood on her outfit.
Yeah.
That close to him would have been messy.
Just horrific. Yeah. He was ready to go, though. So that's a pretty dark moment for your hero. And then, like you said, a really fun twist where she goes, wait, I have a way to do this without really dying.
Because she's a doctor. So she has some medical knowledge. I don't know if it was brought up. That's her occupation.
She knows what she's doing. She's not just no amateur flatliner.
Do you remember what kind of doctor she is?
A junior doctor. Because as soon as the other doctor, the older man, shows up, he's like, let me tell you how things work.
Right.
It's a little bit insulting, I thought.
Okay, so let's go back to the beginning of the section because we were very excited to talk about Frank's Flatliner episode because any excuse to bring up that scene from Popstar.
Of course.
But Lucy and Frank's dinner, that was a cool scene. I really like that scene, actually, where Ray is seated at the table and Frank can see him and hear him, and he's trying to have Lucy and Ray have a date, but it gradually shifts into Frank and Lucy having a date. Good writing in this scene to kind of make Lucy stay sympathetic, even though her husband is very very newly deceased and she's kind of interested in Frank, but the movie is smart about how it plays it and you never really feel like she's getting over it too fast.
Yeah, she's not being weird. We can see that there's a seed of something going on between Lucy and Frank, but on the second watch, I went back and I'm like, oh, she's actually not acting inappropriate at all. She's actually quite interested in what Ray has to say and willing to think the best about her newly deceased husband until she starts to learn that he's even more of a fuck up than she thought. She's like, there is one thing. Where did my life savings of $16,000 go? And he's like, well, I blew it. I made a bad investment with it and it's all gone. And then she gets upset about that. And then Ray calls her a bitch. So it's the start of like things going sour where you're like, okay, she can move on from Ray now and start to hook up with Frank.
It is funny, like their big fight happens through an intermediary. That's a nice twist. But I did want to shout out one specific, not really a line, but a writing choice they made in this section, which is it does a lot of lifting with not a lot of exposition. The waiter comes around. The waiter at Excalibur, by the way, which is a place I would love to eat. I'm a fucking sucker for a theme restaurant.
Yeah.
Everybody walking around in Arthurian garb.
Some badass stuff. And their waiter, let me shout this out. So he's in the full armor and engraved on the breastplate of this armor that he's wearing, pretty much the white tree of Gondor. Go back and look at that.
I gotta check that out.
It's pretty close. I don't know where they came up with that because this was well ahead of when they would be thinking about those things. But I'm like, what the heck?
It's only about a year before he started talking to, I guess, Miramax at first, actually. He was a large fan of the Lord of the Rings books growing up. So it could be a choice he made to try to sneak in an homage. That's awesome.
It could have been.
That. But anyway, before I started gushing over Excalibur and how much I want to eat there, if it's a real restaurant in Wellington, I'm going.
Totally.
The waiter asks Lucy, do you want red or white wine? And Ray answers for her, but she can't hear him, obviously, because he's a ghost. And he says, red wine. We always get red wine. And she says, white wine. I never really liked red wine.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, like that's a clever little bit of writing to drive home a lot about what was wrong with their relationship without making either of them seem like over the top horrible.
It's a really nice little moment.
But then the Grim Reaper crashes the party, and it's basically one of the Dementors from Harry Potter.
He looks good and spooky. He's very Dementor. Like, I never paid enough attention to Harry Potter to understand them, but they were definitely one of the visual characters that stuck out once you started to see those movies. So he went from being stuck behind wallpaper in the first scene. He was kind of like a carpet monster. And now we're not supposed to know if it's the same guy yet, because now he's on the loose and he's full Grim Reaper. He's just like a hooded thing with no legs that floats around and swings a scythe.
During my initial viewing, and this might just be because I'm an idiot, but I never really assumed that it was one guy. I thought it was like a series of ghosts.
Oh, okay.
Maybe because the way I understand ghosts is they typically haunt a place. So I assume like the house has its little ghost. But I never really assumed that this is all one spirit doing all this bad stuff. I thought maybe it was like a Ghostbusters thing where like paranormal activity was starting to be like centralized in one area. And we were going to find out who the big bad was behind it all later. I didn't realize that the big bad was the thing in the walls the whole time.
Same, yeah. No, that's a great point. I think the way you took it probably helped your enjoyment, where you were talking about seeing two parallel tracks that weren't necessarily related. I was trying to connect them the whole time, which is difficult, and it leads you down the sort of red herring false starts that they do on purpose because you're not supposed to be able to connect them right away. But yeah, we see a bunch of different types of ghosts in the movie. You watch the first scene and you're like, okay, in this world, ghosts can't walk around. They have to come out through stuff and interact with people by pushing up through carpets and out through wallpapers to touch them. And then that's not true anywhere else, even of the same guy. But yet there's still two very different kind of ghosts. There's the ordinary kind that look like translucent people and walk around and can interact a little bit with the world. And then there's a fucking Dementor dude who has just some serious badass powers that I don't know if we ever understand exactly why.
No, we don't. As far as I could tell, Johnny, he's just super evil and that gives him all these powers, which fine. That's a good enough explanation, I guess, if you're going to buy everything else the movie's selling.
Yeah, we went with it.
There's not really a sticking point. All right, so I guess it's time to get to the elephant in the room, which is FBI agent Milton Dammers. And we might get some blowback for this because I think he's a pretty beloved character. This movie has quite a fan base now. It became a bit of a cult classic, like we mentioned. And I think a lot of that is just because it's played by Jeffrey Combs, who's a horror icon from Reanimator and lots of other stuff. He's been in like a staggering amount of H.P. Lovecraft adaptations.
I see.
I hope it's not because he's like a fan of the man personally, because H.P. Lovecraft, kind of a huge piece of shit. But he is playing a very strange, over-the-top character here, really hamming it up, going balls to the wall. What did you think of this guy?
And I I didn't want to make a cheap reductive comparison, but I'll say he felt to me like a dollar store Jim Carrey. And maybe that's because of the fact that Jim Carrey was the only other guy in movies of that era that was allowed to do characterizations that big and wild and have those wild eyes and leap into strange, crazy reactions as fluidly as this character does. So I don't want to take anything away from Combs, but this character is hard to take. He's a lot.
He's a lot. And he's an antagonist who's like, I don't know if I would call this a pet peeve, because it's clearly what the director and the writers intend with these type of characters, but he's the character that never really grasps the real danger and the real threat. He's constantly hamstringing the main protagonist and getting in their way and complicating everything.
Right.
So you just get incredibly frustrated with him. And then the performance is so big, he just kind of eats up all the air in the room when he's on screen. You said Jim Carrey. I thought if this movie was made today, it would be a great role for Will Forte, who's great at playing like loud, unlikable people, as we learned with MacGruber, but still making you not hate when he's on screen, which is a tough balancing act.
Yeah, Forte has a likability that would pierce through that. This guy, it's real tough to find anything likable about him, down to the fact that we can talk about his appearance. He made some interesting choices, including, I think, black contact lenses, which just make his eyes cold and dead and evil looking. And so there's no warmth in him.
And the actor suggested his haircut, which I don't know what else to call it, man. It's the Hitler haircut.
Yeah.
There's no other term for it that I'm aware of. He purposely chose a Hitler haircut, and his reasoning was that Dammers is such a nationalist. He wanted to kind of convey that in his appearance. But I don't know if that line of thinking works for me, because you're talking about two different nations. So that haircut is not associated with America in any way. It's associated with Germany, unfortunately. So clearly he made a choice. He had an intended decision there, but I don't know that it paid off in the way he wanted.
It's alienating like all the other choices are. And this character, the further the movie goes, the more you realize he's really around the bend. And then they justify it. They end up revealing why he's so fucked up. But what they don't reveal is why he's part of this movie. Like, he doesn't actually have a connection to anything in the story, except, like you said, to be that very recognizable device of the antagonist who just complicates things and always distracts and makes it harder to deal with the real problem.
Right. This is what I'm saying when I said, like, the movie doesn't have much fluff except one character. I was obviously referring to Dammers, and I certainly respect Jeffrey Combs' performance. I give him a lot of credit for going that big and doing what he did. And I think Jackson's very fond of the character based on the amount of screen time he gets and the way the scenes with him in him are very centered on him.
Yeah.
Everyone else is a supporting character in the room with Dammers. So
long close-ups where you have to stare into his cold, dead eyes for a long time.
He feels like the main character in a movie that's happening off screen and once in a while just overlaps with ours. But he really ends up never tying into the main. Like, I thought there was going to be a reveal that his parent was a victim of Bartlett's or something. And I just thought there'd be some way to tie it back to the Bartlett thing, but it never really does. He's a separate thing completely.
That would have been nice. And certainly not beyond the efforts of Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh. They tied a lot of shit into a lot of other shit. They could have done that if they so chose.
So I guess Dammer's only really valuable thing is giving us some background on Frank. We find out why he's so skeptical of Frank and why people in the town seem to be a little skeptical of him, because his wife died in pretty mysterious circumstances. It's common knowledge, I think, to the town that they had a big fight right before her death. The big fight being about what it's about. I didn't know if the movie was trying to be funny.
Yeah, tell us what that was.
We get a flashback scene to Michael J. Fox with just long flowing locks. So we know that this is the past because he's got just this lion's mane of hair.
Yeah.
And he's arguing with his wife because he wants to build a basketball court in this little space he has outside. And she wants to build a garden. And he just fucking paved over her garden, put a basketball court. And I was like, is this really like the dramatic pivot point of the movie?
And the only explanation we came up with was, this was another sort of writer's trick, is that it makes for a very visual thing to fight over, right? If their fight was over finances or jealousy or family issues or wanting to have a baby or anything, those are just concepts. This is a concrete thing. He made this decision.
Literally.
It's literally a concrete thing. Concrete and steel. And he put this hoop up, and they were able to come back to it later and show in this moment where Lucy realizes that he's a good guy. It's after his wife's death, he turned the basketball court back into a garden, and it's a beautiful little garden. That's great work. I think, again, another kudos to the writers, because they could visually tell so much about what this whole episode meant to this character with just a shot of a beautiful garden and a rusting basketball hoop, and not have to do some long explanation about how he changed his mind about this or that other topic. Nicely done.
Yeah, well explained. Something that they were able to convey with almost no words. Just a sign of good writing. All right, so let's move on to the big museum set piece, which is kind of I
would call this the fun and games part of the movie, to use a Save the Cat terminology. This is where you get some genre payoff. This is a ghosts movie, and it's going to be people and ghosts fighting, and everyone shows up for this. It's in an interesting place place, a museum full of Egyptian sarcophagi. A murder happens, the bad guy, and then the whole good crew shows up. The three ghosts suddenly come in, guns blazing, to help, I almost said Marty, to help Frank fight the bad guy. And there's a lot of fun action. And it's humorous because it's the Shy McBride character and the other ghosts, and they're doing silly stuff amidst this intense, thrilling action. There's a lot of gags thrown in.
Right. It's good physical humor or paraphysical. And then my notes from this section are very scattered because it looks like the heroes are down for the count. They're going to lose. And then in a big heroic twist, the judge, who has not been very gung-ho about all their goings on so far, shows up and he's got his 6-shooter and he's shooting the Grim Reaper guy and he's winning the fight. And you're like, yeah, judge, fuck yeah. I'm with you, buddy. And then he decides to hump a corpse. And he has a line. I love it when they lay still like that or something. I was like, oh, judge, like you ruined it.
That was creepy. And there is a shot of him like
ass out of the sarcophagus.
Yeah, like dog in heat humping the sarcophagus. I mean, they don't show more than that. So it's not like, it's not
you see his
awful.
ass like leaving, you know, you can't see through the sarcophagus. Like his ghost is no longer visible when he's in there, but you see his ass creaking out and back in as he's thrusting. It's like they really were like, this is the funniest shit ever. And we're going to really lay it on here. And it was bad. It did not work for me.
No. And it's based on the setup is that he sees the mummy exhibit and there's an x-ray of it. And he's like, oh, she has such good teeth. What a beautiful young lady. And okay, she's a couple thousand years older than him. So he's supposed to be creaky old, but that joke doesn't actually work. The mummy is not a young girl to him, despite how old he is. But I guess maybe she was a young girl when she died, which makes it even creepier. But let's not take it that far.
Oh, God, man. The judge, he's becoming less likable as time goes on. But
thankfully, he's dead. He's dead at the end of the scene. They're all dead, but he's dispatched by the soul collector, chops him in half, right?
Yeah.
So we talked about first half of the movie comedy, second half more and more serious. This is the first sign that we're turning away from the comedy. It was the first of our comic relief characters gets done away with. And then they fly right into another action sequence where the other two go.
That's what I was about to say, because the movie gives you no time to breathe between the museum fight and what I guess we're just calling the police station fight, because we cut to Frank in custody now and Lucy is trying to break him out. And then boom, the Grim Reaper's back. Like he did not take the night off and lick his wounds, come back tomorrow. He's right back in there immediately. And it's another big action scene. Like it's almost feels like one long scene as opposed to two separate ones. And he takes out our boys, Cyrus and Stuart.
And it's fun. There's some fun action there. They're heroically defending our living heroes, Frank and Lucy, and help them get away from the Reaper. And they help them. I guess she's pretty plucky. She helps them get away from Dammers and get out of the police station. But yeah, they both get killed off during that. So it's like, oh man, there goes the fun.
Speaking of Dammers, we got to talk a little bit about the graveyard scene where he recounts his history as an undercover FBI agent investigating cults, which the movie does a lot of correlating cults and the supernatural, which in my understanding is not really. Like the Manson cult wasn't supernatural in nature.
That's true. Although I guess some of those cults have some satanic worship involved, or at least they're lumped in with that stuff.
They were rumored to be. Like, yeah. Was there ever really any substantiation of the satanic panic? Wasn't it mostly just made up shit?
That's true. But then again, this was 1996, so they were still believing in that shit.
Yeah, he brings Lucy to this graveyard and starts showing her his horrifically scarred and tattooed body that has been branded by all these cults he's been in. And also, you would think like the next cult would be like, how many cults have you been in? Yeah. You know, like you've got all these like mismatched symbols covering your body. We can see the other ones when we put the new one on.
Yeah, these are each undercover assignments. So it's like at some point, does he become less effective as an undercover agent? Or is this just telling us something about cults that they're actually really welcoming, willing to take on anybody?
Yeah, they're like, hey, man, we all have a past. Get in here. But like this scene is pretty twisted. I think Jackson might have thought this was like a funny scene.
Oh,
like Peter Jackson's a fucked up sense of humor, obviously.
That's true.
Like I think he finds this character demented to the point of it's hilarious now, but I don't think the audience went along with it.
No, it's pretty awful just to have to be forced to look at his chest and examine his various scars and tattoos and weird shit that's carved in there. It's like, okay, thank you. Can we escape now?
Right. Put your shirt back on. So more horrifying stuff though. We get the Bartlett reveal. Like the scene in the mansion is pretty harrowing. You see the mother's dead body covered in blood. The movie famously was supposed to be PG-13 and they could not get a PG-13 rating no matter what they did. The MPAA kept giving them an R. So I think Jackson added some stuff back in and I think the mother's corpse on the bed was like, fuck it. If you're not going to give me my PG-13 rating, I'm going to show it anyway.
But is the corpse, should we save that? I think that's still coming up.
Oh.
Man, this movie, there's so much plot. So the Bartlett reveal in this part of the movie, there's more reveals later, but this part of the movie movie is where Frank beats the crap out of him or shoots the crap out of him with some ghost machine guns until his face finally pops out from behind the spooky mask or whatever he was wearing when he was being the Reaper.
It's a good visual effect, but it makes me question the anatomy of spirits. And I'm like, how does this all work? But I guess that's inconsequential. We find out it's Johnny Bartlett is the Reaper.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, the movie's kind of tying itself together now. And that's exciting in a way. But it was also like jarring in a way. Oh, why are you tying my two stories together, man? Like, these are two different things.
For you and I who like to have a little bit of internally consistent logic, even in our sci-fi and fantasy and horror, this Dementor's been chasing everybody and he just shoots it up with a ghost gun. And then he goes, what's your deal? His face is like a little puddle of face and it's still got scary teeth. And he slams it on a grave until Jake Busey's face pops out and he goes, hey, boo, it's me. And you're like, how did you have all those powers? But he doesn't even have a chance to ask that before the pile of goo that is Jake Busey, what's left of his spirit, slides down through some cracks and reforms in a crypt below the ground and gets away again.
Yeah, we never really find out why he's so much more powerful than other ghosts and why he's kind of able to kill people by touching them. I guess you could just write it off as he's more evil than other ones, and that's why he gets his power, which is not great, but it's fine.
Yeah, you got to accept it. But I did wish there was some explanation there. When the bad guy behind the bad guy shows his face, you kind of want more than just, it's me. You kind of want, and this is how I did it. Like, you want one little nod to that, and there kind of isn't. It's just, it's me, and guess what? I'm not dead yet. I'm still going to kill people. And he gets away, and Frank jumps on top of him. But just as he's about to hit him with the scythe for the killing blow, his new friend Lucy revives him, and he's no longer in the spirit world.
Terrible timing, Lucy.
Yeah.
But we can forgive it because she had no way of knowing what was going on there.
No, and one more minute, he would have been dead permanently. So
We've been a Franksicle. I don't think they said that in the movie, but they should have.
they should have.
All right, you ready to take us home?
All right, here we go. Here's how it all wraps up. So while Frank recovers from his near-death experience, Lucy goes to rescue Patricia Bradley from her suspicious mother and from her boyfriend's ghost. But it turns out Patricia is the evil one. Patty has been in league with Johnny the whole time, and she kills her mother when the mom finds out. So Frank arrives and helps trap Johnny's spirit, and then he and Lucy run from a shotgun-toting Patty right into the abandoned hospital where the original Bartlett murder spree took place. And to complicate matters even more, Dammers reappears, freeing Johnny Bartlett's trapped spirit and shooting Frank in the arm before getting his own head blown off by Patty. Patty manages to strangle Frank to death. But then, as a ghost, again he's a ghost, Frank tears Patty's soul out of her body and starts to carry it up towards the gates of heaven, with Johnny's spirit in hot pursuit right behind them. But higher power takes hold of Johnny and Patty and drags them straight to hell. Then Frank is told it's not his time to go, and his spirit is sent back into his body on Earth, where he starts a new life and a happy new romantic relationship with Lucy.
So much happening here, but let's start with the Patricia twist, because maybe I'm a fucking idiot, but I didn't see it coming, and it hit me. It worked for me. How about you?
It totally worked. Like you said, it's a parallel movie where they spend a lot of time and effort sending you down the wrong direction, making you think the mom is evil and weird and creepy.
I mean, she is weird and creepy. Maybe not evil, but she's definitely weird and creepy.
She's weird and creepy, but it's great. Again, it's really good writing, because I watched on the second watch, once I knew that she was good, the things that she literally says in those early scenes that you take as ominous and bad are the literal truth. She's like, you can't trust my daughter. She'll kill you. Like, she says all this stuff, and you're like, you think she's a nut. And
Cold-blooded murder.
She was being real the whole time.
It begs the question, though, of why did she want Patty in her house at all and not in jail? If she knew she was evil and did all this stuff, I guess, parental love.
It's a mother's love kind of thing. But yeah, they don't show that side of her, of accepting the killer that she knows and trying to rehabilitate her and failing.
I just find it hilarious that when Lucy goes upstairs to get the mom and finds her dead body, she's like checking on her. Like, what are you waiting for? We got to go.
Right.
And she walks by Patty dancing in the kitchen with a huge knife in her hand. She's slow dancing with Johnny, but of course Lucy can't see him. And I was like, you're just going to ignore that, huh? Just go right for the mom. You're still no suspicions at all about Patty at this point. Lucy, bless her heart, she's maybe a little trusting.
She's very trusting. Like, her first impression was Patty is an abused woman and I need to protect her at all costs. And she never drops that impression, even when things start to get creepier and creepier.
Until she's literally chasing her with a shotgun and she's like, maybe she isn't so good.
I better go now.
But that twist worked much better for me than the Johnny Bartlett is the Reaper twist, because at that time I was like, what? But this time I was like, oh, You know, those
Yeah,
are two reactions.
this whole part of the movie plays like a classic horror movie reveal, mistaken identities about who's really evil, and it all happens. And the house continues to look spectacular. It's fucking so cool. The wind is blowing curtains through, and there's shadows, and there's leaves, and there's just so much shit going on. You're like, this is an awesome haunted house. And then the action here is very classic horror movie too, because now it's almost Stephen Kingy. It's like evil woman with a shotgun chasing our heroes, trying to shoot him down. It's really fun horror movie stuff, I thought.
She is kind of casting a bit of an Annie Wilkes shadow.
Yeah.
That was the name of the character in Misery.
It's really fun. And that continues from the haunted house into the haunted sanatorium, the old abandoned hospital, which you thought you couldn't get any creepier. Well, they got creepier. They're in an abandoned hospital.
They go there with a good reason, though. I did like that the movie isn't just like, quick to the hospital, because it's the closest building or whatever. There is an old chapel there, and they need to drop the ashes on consecrated ground.
Yes.
And I'm like, okay, because otherwise I would be staying way the fuck away from that place. But
Get in the car and drive, you guys. But nope, they had a plan.
And then the movie does something really inventive here, where Frank, who can see ghosts, that takes a whole nother meaning here because he can see the hospital as it was on the day of the massacre. It's played extremely straight, which I think is a really wise choice here, and further indicates to me that Jackson really knew when to play his cards. You see the actual crime that Johnny Bartlett was convicted and executed for, where he killed 12 people in a hospital, and it's appropriately horrifying, maybe a little too much so, because, 1996 was a very different time than 2022. It's hard to watch through today's lens. He clearly he wanted it to be a scary, harrowing scene.
And yeah, you can tell Peter Jackson had a real investment in making that scary and cool. And again, it has that Stephen King vibe of old places in the modern day flashing back to some historic version of them where this great trauma had occurred. It gives you some Shining vibes.
He does that in It a lot as well, too. In
yeah.
Both the novel and I think in the movie, he's constantly having characters living out a past of the same location. They can see what actually happened there. And it's very effective.
Yeah, like you said, you don't expect this because you're like, oh, this is just a chase in the dark, scary place movie. And all of a sudden your hero is seeing this brightly lit, horrific crime from 30 years ago. And it's unexpected and it's beautifully done. It looks great. The transitions from the totally decrepit hospital to the shining, bright hospital of yesteryear are beautifully done. It's quite compelling.
Because, it goes in and out. I feel like every time Frank is hit or falls down a stair, it kind of comes to. It goes back and forth. So it's not just like you see it and then you go back to the present day. The movie keeps jumping back and forth as Frank is having physical trauma done upon him. He's quite resilient in this sequence.
Oh, man. He gets beat up like Bruce Willis level. He just takes a lot of blows in this final section.
He falls through like 6 floors and lands. That's after he got shot, I'm fairly certain.
After being shot, yeah.
And you said Dahmer shot him in the arm. You didn't say what he shot him with. He pulled out a fucking Uzi.
Another weird choice for a weird character full of weird choices.
He's carrying around, I thought it was going to be a pistol. He pulls a fucking Uzi out and shoots him in the arm. And then at this point, Dahmer just gets his fucking head blown off.
Yeah, Frank has that small moment of revenge on Dammers, who's fucked everything up for him so far, including right here. This is immediately after Dammers grabs the urn of Johnny's ashes and unleashes the ghost that he thought he had done away with. So, he's deserved it.
Oh, he's totally deserved it by this point.
But yeah, like we were talking about earlier, the bad guys are still multiplying, right? This is the end of the movie, and it's not just hero versus big bad. It's 3-on-2. It's just really complicated. And you're like, okay, at least Dammers got his comeuppance, and he's not going to fuck with them. But now there's Johnny's ghost and Patty with an unending series of shotgun shells too.
Yeah, she loaded up. She went to the sporting goods store before. But it's not even as simple as 3-on-2 because it's like 1-on-2-on-2 because Dammers is his own faction.
True.
It's like there's all these opposing forces at work here. And like the movie, it all makes sense and none of it is too muddled. It's just a lot. You're kind of fatigued because this whole sequence, everything from the mansion to the hospital, it's probably like at least half an hour.
It's a lot.
And it's pretty propulsive action. It's scary and violent and tragic at times. And it's emotionally draining for this movie we thought was going to be relatively light fare.
Yeah, because just before the end are some of the most emotionally poignant moments, like you said, where the reenactments of the original killings, they're hard to take when you see the teenage version of Patty killing people and enjoying it. And it's like, whoa, this is harsh. And then she kills our hero. Again, he dies. Again, she chokes him out and he falls dead to the floor. And another surprise thing, I didn't see it coming. He jumps back up and tears the soul out of her body. I didn't know you could do that.
Now, and Peter Jackson, I find his idea of the afterlife amazingly quaint. It is so traditional. It's literally like people standing on clouds and there's like a harp playing and there's little gates and everyone's like, it's got everything you want. There's fine cigars and women and everybody gets exactly what they want in heaven. And hell is literally like big snakes and fire and rivers of blood. And it is so literal. But I was like, it's kind of cute. I don't don't know.
It's corny stuff, but it gets us out of what started to be a really gritty, rough movie.
I think this is what I was alluding to earlier, that Jake Busey is pretty bad in his final moments in this movie when he's in that little state in between, I guess you could call it purgatory, in between heaven and hell. He's hamming it up a little too much, because like maybe those line deliveries would have worked earlier in the movie, but I feel like the tone of the movie has changed so drastically, and then he's back to hamming it up again. Overall, I liked his performance, but I think it goes a little too over the top here. But then that's basically the end of the movie. Frank gets sent back to Earth. He's living out his days with Lucy, and he's finishing his house, and that's it.
They hit it off, though. Thank God.
Yeah, luckily it seems like it worked out. All right, that was The Frighteners. Do you want to hear a little bit about where Peter Jackson went after this movie?
I hope he got another chance to make a movie.
I think he did. This also covers where Fran Walsh went after this movie, because she has not done anything without him, and he has not done anything without her.
Yeah.
So they go hand in hand. So after The Frighteners, he made some little movies you might have heard about called Lord of the Rings. We kind of talked about that in the beginning of the episode, so we don't need to dwell on it too much. 2005, he made King Kong, a movie which I feel like got a little bit of a critical reevaluation in a negative way in recent years.
Interesting.
But I've always enjoyed it. It's bloated. It's a fucking Peter Jackson movie, so I don't know what you were expecting, but I think it's well done. I think Naomi Watts is great in it. Adrian Brody is pretty good in it. I haven't watched it in a while, but I want to now. It's got me back on a Jackson kick.
Yeah, me too.
And then he took a break from all his epics to make The Lovely Bones, not The Lonely Bones, as Ian likes to say. This movie is amazing. I've never seen it. Let me clarify. Okay. The story of this movie is amazing because he hired Ryan Gosling to play the father in this movie. And Ryan Gosling was nervous about playing like a father of a teenager because he was 26 at the time, which is fair.
Sure.
And his solution to this problem was to gain 60 pounds and grow a beard. Nobody told him to do this. He didn't clear it with anybody. He showed up to set a month before for screen tests and was real fat and had a beard. And Peter Jackson was like, what the fuck did you do? You are fired, and hired Mark Wahlberg instead. So that's quite a downgrade in the acting talent department, in my opinion.
Yeah, it changes the tone of your movie, just switching from one of those guys to the other.
Yeah, Mark. Oh, wow, my daughter, she killed herself. Oh, no. He's not great at playing anguish.
Yeah, from what we understand, this is not an action movie. It's a mystery, supernatural thriller with a family angle.
Yeah, based on a very successful book. It was not successful critically or commercially. We could cover it one day if we wanted to. It got probably the worst reviews of Jackson's career, I would imagine.
Oh.
I can't think of another movie he's made that was as poorly received. He was hired to make a Halo movie. He was attached to a Halo movie for a long time. And at first as director, but quickly he decided he just wanted to executive produce it. And he got Neil Blomkamp attached to direct it. The movie eventually fell through, and Jackson and Blomkamp went on to work together and make one of the great underdog success stories in modern movie history with District 9.
So cool.
And they took a lot of the designs they had come up with for the Halo movie and a lot of the ideas and just kind of carried them over to District 9, and just a great movie that unfortunately I don't think Neil Blomkamp has ever lived up to.
Yeah, that's too bad. He seemed so promising.
Yeah, and even the actor in District 9, I was quite fond of him.
Yeah.
Charlton Copley.
Yes.
He's been in stuff. He's been good, but I thought he was really poised for a long and big leading man career.
He was so great in District 9, and yeah, again, couldn't get back there.
Jackson, then he did some directing on Adventures of Tintin, which was billed as a Steven Spielberg movie.
Oh.
They were kind of two-handing it at the
Didn't realize that.
Jackson was very involved in the production, but then he kind of got roped into doing the Hobbit movies against his will.
Ooh.
So he had to back out of Tintin. What happened was he was going to produce them. Weta Workshop was going to work on them, do all the stuff like they had for the originals. And Guillermo del Toro, if you remember, was supposed to make the Hobbit movie.
Okay.
I think it was going to be 2 movies when Guillermo del Toro was attached to it. He got cold feet because for every Guillermo del Toro movie, there are about fucking 15 that are talked about and go into some form of pre-production, but then never get made.
Okay.
So they had all this money invested. They were pretty far along in pre-production, I think, and New Line must have just pulled up a barge full of money to Peter Jackson's house and said, will you please save our franchise? And he begrudgingly did, but you can watch those movies and see his heart's not in it.
I never got past the first one. I don't know if I even got past all of the first one. There was just something missing.
The first one is the best one, so whatever that tells you.
What's missing from them? There's something that resonated with me, even being a big Lord of the Rings fan. Like I couldn't latch onto it.
It's hard to put a finger on it. A lot of people point to the overuse of CGI. There was like a barrel sequence in the first one where they're floating down a river in barrels. And even the hobbits themselves, I'm pretty sure or not the hobbits, but the dwarves are CGI. And it just looks like absolute shit compared to how much care and planning he put into the practical effects for the first one. And just a dwarf and an elf are in love. And there's a whole romance subplot there. Like it felt like fan fiction. They didn't really raid the appendices for the supplemental stuff that they threw back in there like they did with the original trilogy to some extent. They just kind of made it up. And some of it felt untrue to the world that Tolkien had made.
bummer.
And I don't mean that in the way like people are complaining about the Rings of Power. Like there's a black elf, because I don't give a shit about that. In the way that, I don't know, they just didn't feel like characters he would have written. It's hard to say. There's a lot wrong with them. So it's kind of hard to nail things down.
Yeah,
but
well,
they're very bad.
Leave it at that.
Then he made the fantastic World War I documentary, They Shall Not Grow Old.
Oh, okay.
Where he restored a lot of old footage from World War I and colorized it. It was a lot of what he would later apply to the Beatles stuff with Get Back. It's a really worthwhile thing to watch if you ever have a chance to do so.
That's cool. You were just talking last week about how you're interested in World War I stuff, and this sounds like a great entry point for some of that.
Yeah, I highly recommend that if you can find it. And then he and Walsh wrote Mortal Engines along with their frequent collaborator, Philippa Boyens, who worked with them on The Lord of the Rings. Mm-hmm. Mortal Engines, of course, a huge failure in every way. Lost a mountain of money, was ravaged by critics. It is on the schedule. We will cover it in the nearish future, I believe.
I think I watched the first 15 minutes of Mortal Engines, unless I watched the first 15 minutes of the other movie that was about giant rolling cities. Were there two?
Was this another Armageddon and Deep Impact thing? I can't think of another one. The only one I remember is Mortal Engines.
Okay, maybe just Mortal Engines. Maybe I made that up, that there was one of those scenarios with that movie too, which sounds ridiculous now that I say it, but it was really bad. I can't wait to watch that and talk about it in depth.
Yeah, I'm actually I know I'm going to dislike it, but I think I'm going to dislike it in a very interesting way.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to watch it. I like stories about like moving and floating cities. One of my favorite books is The Scar by China Miéville, which is about a floating city called Armada, which I highly recommend that book. But yeah, Mortal Engines didn't work for anybody, apparently. And then he made Get Back, which we talked about on the podcast a little bit. It was quite good, whether you're into the Beatles or not. I'm not a huge Beatles guy, but I still found it worthwhile. And he's doing a follow-up to it. I guess there was enough footage. He's doing a part two.
Wow, that's neat.
So, some of the other actors considered for the role of Frank Bannister, do you want to hear who they might have been?
Yeah, tell me, because this is like one of my main points of this movie is, did Fox make it worse?
Tom Cruise.
Okay.
Matthew Broderick. Can't see it. Johnny Depp. No, thank you. John Cusack. Interesting.
Yes. Now you're getting somewhere.
I could maybe see John Cusack. Yeah. Danny DeVito.
Would be great if it was an absolute farce, but I don't think that's where you wanted to go with it. Out of those names, Cusack could have totally pulled it off.
He jumps out at me. He's got a sullenness to him that I think
exactly
the character.
Sullenness that doesn't make you sad. Like when Michael J. Fox is sad, you're sad because I go, why is that guy sad? But like John Cusack, you're like, okay, I know why he's sad because that's the kind of guy he is. And so I think it would be a lesser burden on his shoulders and he could still take you more places.
Maybe it's high fidelity coloring my perception, but John Cusack has elder emo energy to me.
Totally.
I do like Fox in this role, but I agree there's maybe something about his energy that doesn't click 100% of the time.
It's probably not fair to him, but it's who he had been in Hollywood before that. Just it's hard to get those impressions out of your mind.
He did Casualties of War, which is much darker. That was the Brian De Palma Vietnam movie, but they also kind of played on his innocence in that movie to make you feel for him. This was his last leading role. Sadly, we know why. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 1991, but he didn't go public with his diagnosis until 1998, 2 years after this movie. He did keep acting. He's still acting to this day. He's in stuff. He seems to be managing his illness relatively well. He's been obviously a big vocal supporter of fundraising for Parkinson's research and working with politicians to try to get stem cell research more funding and more widely accepted and adopted, because that has shown some promise in being able to help Parkinson's sufferers.
He's done incredible work along Parkinson's lines.
His last big role was on the Michael J. Fox Show, which was a sitcom about a man with Parkinson's who decides to go back to work after taking a few years off to deal with his disease.
I did not remember that.
Yeah, it was 2013. I think it was just a one season thing. But even after that, he was on Designated Survivor, which we brought up in the Dark City episode because that was a Kiefer Sutherland movie.
Okay.
He was in See You Yesterday, which was a 2019 Netflix sci-fi kids movie. So it seems like he's still up for taking roles. He does a lot of voice acting, which is probably easier for him because he could do it mostly in the comfort of his home. But he'll still go to set and make a movie now and then.
Good dude. One of Hollywood's really likable people.
I've never heard a negative word about Michael J. Fox as a person, so easy guy to root for. Then, so let's talk a little bit about Trini Alvarado, because we mentioned her being someone we really liked, and we're wondering why she isn't in more stuff. It seems like when I was reading about her, she described herself as very much like a homebody, and she doesn't like being in the public eye too much, so she probably takes enough roles to make a decent living, but doesn't go out of her way to be a star with a capital S. She also, she reminded me so much of Alexa Palladino, who is an actress I really enjoy. Most people probably recognize her from Boardwalk Boardwalk Empire, but she was in The Irishman.
Okay.
They have very similar look. She started acting at age 7. She's still acting at 55, and she seems to have gotten through life without major scandal, which is rare for a child actor who's been active for that long.
Yeah.
She's been acting for almost half a fucking century.
Very impressive.
She was in The Staircase, that HBO show that just came out. It was
okay.
with the Colin Firth, I think, was the lead in that. Very stacked cast, and that got really good reviews. I didn't check it out. Weirdly, that was a big true crime story. She's also got a small connection to the Robert Durst scandal because she was in All Good Things, the Ryan Gosling movie that was a thinly veiled Robert Durst biopic.
Oh, I didn't know a lot about that.
Robert Durst liked All Good Things so much, he was famously reclusive for many years. He contacted the director, Andrew Jarecki is his name, and said, I would be willing to be interviewed by you to kind of talk about my life because you made this movie I admire. And that became The Jinx, which was
holy shit. That's the genesis of The Jinx.
Yeah. He liked the movie All Good Things so much that he agreed to be interviewed by Andrew Jarecki, actually sought him out.
Oh my God. I was really into The Jinx when that came out. And I didn't realize that it started with him finding this Ryan Gosling version of himself to be flattering and being like, yeah, let's talk, buddy.
Yeah. Andrew Jarecki directed both All Good Things and The Jinx and got Robert Durst on tape admitting to his many crimes.
What did he say? He's in the fucking bathroom.
What did you do, Robert? Killed them all, of course, or something like that. It was said in such like a stilted, weird way.
Yes. It was so insane. I still remember that feeling of hearing that line the first time when it plays in the show. Incredible.
So many true crime documentaries and podcasts have such unsatisfying endings. The Jinx is the antidote for that. If you ever want to watch a documentary.
It ruined it for everybody else. It's like, top this, buddy. Get your fucking killer to confess on mic.
Fucking guy's in jail still. Oh no, he died. He died in January.
We won't miss him.
We will not. Fuck you, Robert Durst. John Astin is still alive. Holy shit. I was not ready for that when I looked him up.
Yeah, good for him, man.
He's in his like mid-90s. I also didn't realize he's Sean Astin's adopted dad.
Okay. I knew it was him and Patty Duke were a couple, right?
Yeah.
I thought they were his bio parents.
No, he adopted Sean Astin, but that's another
okay.
Peter Jackson connection because Sean Astin, of course, Samwise Gamgee.
Yeah.
And that about wraps up the Frighteners. We're doing a different type of movie for our podcast next week. We don't do a lot of these kind of breezy rom-coms. We just talked about High Fidelity. This is a movie that owes quite a debt, I think, to High Fidelity. Okay. We're talking about Empire Records, which is a movie I remember watching quite a bit. Hold on. And before I make a fool of myself, I need to see which one came out first. Nope. High Fidelity came out 5 years after Empire Records.
Oh, okay.
So, wow, I thought High Fidelity was like early 90s. Quite a cast in this. I always remembered it as being Liv Tyler's movie, but she's like last billed, which is weird, even though she's front and center on the poster.
Yeah, she's selling it on the poster. That's why I'm clicking on this, because Liv Tyler looks so darn cute.
Debbie Mazar, Renee Zellweger, Robin Tunney. Whatever happened to Robin Tunney? She was really good. I mean, I assume she's still acting, but
tune in next week. You're going to find out.
Right. That was The Frighteners. Thank you guys so much for listening. This was a fun one.
Yeah.
I enjoyed this movie quite a bit. And
good movie. Watch it. If we ever forget to tell people whether we recommend it, this is definitely one that you should watch.
Totally worth watching. I'd say get the director's cut if you can. That's what Peter Jackson prefers. That's what I prefer. Please remember to rate, review, subscribe to the pod if you're enjoying it. We're certainly enjoying making it.
Yeah.
You can hit us up on Twitter at BlastZonePod. Email us blastzonepod@gmail.com. Any suggestions? This is proof right here that writing us emails and suggesting movies works.
We're making dreams come true. This was nobody's dream. It was just a good idea. Thank you.
Just a good idea.
Was it Kimberly?
Kimberly.
Thanks, Kimberly.
And we'll see you next time in the Blast Zone.
See you next time in the Blast Zone.
The Blast Zone.